Hi, everyone. My name is Rowan Burge. I'm the Provincial Director of the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition. Really happy to be here today. I just want to briefly acknowledge myself and orient myself as a white settler to these lands. We've had a good land acknowledgement earlier, but I wanted to make sure that that was a part of the conversation. So the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition is a coalition of about 80 different organizations across BC that work together to advocate for poverty eradication. That includes housing, it includes policy around climate justice, it includes a wide variety of areas. The PRC was formed in 2009, has been around since then. We originally were formed to advocate for a poverty reduction plan for BC, which didn't exist at the time. We now have a poverty reduction plan, but continue to lobby the government to improve upon that plan. There's actually, the poverty reduction strategy is up for review right now. There's on their website a public survey. I would encourage you all to go on there and let the government know they need to do more around poverty reduction and eradication in BC. So we work from our Blueprint for Justice, which is our policy platform that outlines the principles from which we work. Economic security, things like a living wage, things like paid sick leave for workers, that's part of that category. Universal basic services, things like free childcare, things like public health services. Equity is at the heart of all of the work that we do. And then climate justice has become, I think, more and more a part of our work, in part because of the conversation we're having today around energy poverty. I think you said it best, housing justice is, in fact, energy justice, and all of it comes back to equity and to poverty. So we do quite a bit of advocacy work at the PRC, Poverty Reduction Coalition, including I had the opportunity to be one of the panelists on the coroner's report for the inquiry into the heat dome deaths. I think Dr. Michael Schwantz is also here today. I think I saw him. Oh, hi. He was also a panelist. And that was a really interesting opportunity to learn more about the deaths that happened during the heat dome. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about that and around tenant and renters' rights to heating and to cooling. We also do work around housing and energy affordability, many different campaigns, digital justice, things like the rights to having a cell phone, the rights to Wi-Fi in your home, things like that. Many of the heat alerts that went out through people's digital devices, and not everybody has a digital device, so we do some work around that as well. Food security, many different areas that we advocate for in our work. But I specifically wanted to talk today about the CAN program, which is our Community Action Network, which is a group of people with lived and living experiences who go through a training and leadership program with us. Our CAN manager is also here today. And that program equips folks with some tools around advocacy, community organizing, things like how to deal with media and different skill sets so that people can become more involved in advocacy and policy making in their lives and their communities, which has become a really important thing for us in terms of our policy work, is how can we include meaningfully people with lived and living experiences of poverty and or homelessness to make sure that our policy asks are reflecting the actual needs on the ground of people experiencing the material realities that they're facing in their lives, often in very, very deep levels of poverty. So we do these training programs for folks, and we also have an ongoing network of people that we engage with regularly, connect with different partners to do this work together. So I want to talk a little bit about the right to adequate housing, not just the right to housing, but adequacy is really important. The right to heating, the right to cooling, all of these things have been said today, and I just want to emphasize their importance. It is really a life and death measure, being able to access cooling in your home as well as heating. And I think that we need to start moving our thinking in that direction more. There was a really great Tyee op-ed that came out, and some of the authors are here today about the rights that tenants have with heat wave mitigation strategies. There's also some really great research that came out around like the cooling of cities and how in lower income neighborhoods, it tends to be a lot actually physically hotter than in higher income and more affluent neighborhoods. So really important thing to be thinking about. During the heat dome, of course, 619 people died. That does not include people who may have died after the heat dome was actually occurring from impacts of the heat injury. A lot of folks were elderly, disabled, low-income people. Many people were renters. And as has been said a few times, people who are renting often have less ability to advocate for themselves in their homes, less control over their environments, and less ability to put in the infrastructure they might need to cool. And of course, being able to go out and purchase a cooling device for yourself requires also being able to pay for the energy ongoingly to keep that device running. It also means having your landlord approve that in some cases, and that's really inaccessible for a lot of folks that we connect with and work with. It's also Not always possible if you're living in an environment where it's social housing, supportive housing, shelters, for example. It's not always the case that you'll feel comfortable talking to your landlord about these kinds of issues. And so that's a really important thing to be considering. Yeah, we also connect with a lot of people who are unhoused, who rely on public space outdoors, who don't have things like the right to heating and cooling in their lives because they don't even have the right to housing. So I think this conversation about housing is just so important, and adequacy in housing. Many of our clients live in conditions that are just terrible, like one-room apartment for a family of 7, people who are living on income assistance and disability assistance who just aren't able to afford basic necessities of life. You know, we have an affordability crisis, we have a housing crisis, and those things are really meeting in a place where the depth of poverty that people in BC are experiencing is quite devastating. Okay. So we're obviously encouraging the BC government to work closely with health authorities, municipalities, and Indigenous nations to resource cooling, heating, and disaster mitigation strategies specifically targeted for equity-deserving groups and highlighting those groups, and also bringing those groups in as lived experience experts to get information about how we should be doing this work from people that are actually experiencing these realities. I also think things like extreme weather warnings, you know, it's great to have alerts that go out on your phone, but there need to be other ways of getting information to people about, you know, their rights and things like that, and also how to protect themselves from extreme weather as that continues to happen. We also, the digital divide is a really important thing that I think we need to be thinking about in this conversation too, of like how people are getting information about what's happening with the weather. And then, of course, we're advocating for cooling devices to be issued to folks experiencing poverty. I think, too, like in situations where, like, for example, the heat dome, if we know that it's going to be deadly heat, maybe we should even pay to put poor people in air-conditioned hotel units if needed be, just for a couple of days. Like, I think there's other policy avenues we could consider in short-term extreme situations like that to prevent further death and harm. Of course, housing justice, like we talked about. Energy affordability is a huge problem for many people experiencing poverty, especially deep poverty. We hear from folks all the time that they're like either going to pay their energy bill or their cell phone bill, or they're either going to pay for their kids' medication for this month, or, you know, it is that people are not accessing the things that they need in their lives because they just can't afford them. And so from that, we support raising the income assistance and disability rates, because that really enforces a level of deep poverty that takes away options from people who would really benefit from some of the policy movements that can be made. And then also things like access to public education, public digital public internet that's owned, I think is really important as well. I think we need to, again, like start thinking about the right to heating, the right to cooling, the right to housing as human rights. And those things are not always super compatible with the way that we're currently treating things like housing and energy. So I think that's all for now. Feel free to get in touch, and I'm sure there'll be more questions. Thank you.